Warning: the following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Accordingly, viewer discretion is advised. When you go to see your doctor, you trust them completely. You trust that the medication they prescribe is meant to help you. You trust that the injection they administer is what they say it is. You trust that the person in that room, with that degree on the wall and that stethoscope around their neck, is there to keep you alive. Harold Shipman was a family doctor in Hyde, Greater Manchester. He was well liked. He was trusted. He made home visits. He sat with elderly patients and held their hands and told their families everything would be all right. He was also injecting those patients with fatal overdoses of morphine. Then signing their death certificates. Then falsifying their medical records to cover his tracks. The Shipman inquiry concluded he had likely killed at least 215 patients, with the possibility of many more. He is the most prolific serial killer in British history. Possibly in the history of the English-speaking world. And he was never stopped. Not by his colleagues. Not by the police, who investigated him and cleared him 5 months before his arrest. Not by the medical system that gave him unlimited access to controlled drugs and unlimited trust. He was stopped by one woman. The daughter of his final victim. This is Harold Shipman. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946, in Nottingham, the second of 4 children in a working-class family. His mother Vera was the dominant figure in his childhood, a woman who instilled in him an acute sense of his own superiority over those around him. When Shipman was 17 years old, his mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. In her final months, she received regular morphine injections from the family doctor, who made home visits to administer them. Shipman watched those visits closely. Watched how the drug softened her pain. Watched how the doctor moved through the house with quiet authority. Whether this experience planted something in Shipman, some association between morphine and power, between injection and control, psychiatrists have debated for decades. Nobody knows for certain. Vera Shipman died when Harold was 17. He channeled his grief into his studies. He got into Leeds School of Medicine. He qualified as a doctor in 1970. He took his first job as a GP in Todmorden, West Yorkshire. And almost immediately, he began stealing drugs. In 1975, Shipman was found to have been obtaining pethidine, a powerful opioid, by forging prescriptions in patients' names. He was fined. He was required to attend a drug treatment program. He was not struck off. He was allowed to continue practicing medicine. In 1977, Shipman joined a group practice in Hyde, a small town on the eastern edge of Greater Manchester. He built a reputation as a dedicated, hard-working GP. He was known for making home visits. For taking time with elderly patients. For being the kind of doctor who actually cared. In 1993, he set up his own single-handed practice on Market Street. Now he had no colleagues to observe him. No partners to notice patterns. He was entirely in control of his own patient list. A list of approximately 3,000 people. The killings had begun long before Hyde. The Shipman inquiry later concluded his first murder was likely in 1972, a patient named Eva Lyons in Todmorden, who died of what was recorded as cancer but whose morphine levels at death were inconsistent with her treatment. By the time he opened his Market Street surgery, he had been killing for over 2 decades. His method never varied. He would visit a patient. Usually elderly, usually female, usually alone. He would administer a lethal injection of diamorphine, medical heroin, directly into a vein. Death followed within minutes. Then he would call the family. Express condolences. Sign the death certificate. And alter the patient's computer records, backdating symptoms, inventing deterioration, creating a medical history that justified the death he had just caused. A police computer analyst later testified how Shipman had altered his computer records to create symptoms that his dead patients never had, in most cases within hours of their deaths. He did this for 30 years. And nobody stopped him. In March 1998, 5 months before Shipman's arrest, a local GP named Dr. Linda Reynolds went to the Stockport coroner with her concerns. She had noticed something deeply troubling. Shipman's patients were dying at an unusually high rate. And an unusually high proportion of those deaths were being certified by Shipman himself, without second opinions, without postmortems, with cremation recommended in most cases. Dr. Reynolds was not alone in her concerns. A local funeral director had also noticed the pattern, that Shipman's patients seemed to die more often than those of other local GPs, and that they tended to die in the afternoon, during or shortly after a home visit from their doctor. The police investigated. They found nothing. 5 months before Shipman's arrest, police abandoned an investigation into the doctor that had been prompted by a colleague who became worried about how often Shipman asked his practice to provide a second signature on cremation certificates. After being cleared, Shipman killed 3 more patients. 3 people who would still be alive if the investigation had been more thorough. If anyone had looked at the medical records more carefully. If anyone had exhumed a body. Instead, the investigation was closed. And Shipman went back to work. On the morning of June 24, 1998, Shipman visited an 81-year-old patient named Kathleen Grundy at her home. Grundy was in good health and very active the day before her death. She was visited by Shipman early that morning for a blood sample and was later found dead, sitting on her settee. Shipman signed the death certificate. He noted that he had seen her recently and that she was in poor health, a lie. He suggested to her family that a post-mortem was unnecessary. That she was old. That these things happen. Then he made a catastrophic mistake. Kathleen Grundy had a daughter named Angela Woodruff, a solicitor. When Angela was contacted by a local solicitor about a typewritten will in her mother's name, a will that left Kathleen Grundy's entire estate of approximately £386,000 not to her family, but to Harold Shipman, Angela immediately knew something was wrong. The signature on the will didn't match Grundy's writing. Angela went to the police. Kathleen Grundy's body was exhumed. Toxicology found lethal levels of morphine, far in excess of anything consistent with medical treatment. The toxicologist reported that her body contained a lethal dose of morphine and death would have occurred within 3 hours of the fatal dose. Shipman was arrested on September 7, 1998. Police raided his surgery. They seized his computer. They found a typewriter matching the one used to forge Kathleen Grundy's will. And when they examined his patient records, they found something that stopped them cold. Death after death after death. Stretching back decades. Shipman's trial began in October 1999 and lasted until January 2000. He was charged with the murders of 15 patients, as well as 1 count of forgery related to Kathleen Grundy's will. He pleaded not guilty to everything. He showed no remorse. No emotion. He sat in the dock and maintained the same quiet, superior composure he had shown throughout his career, as if the entire proceeding was beneath him. The evidence was overwhelming. Medical records falsified within hours of deaths. Morphine levels in exhumed bodies far beyond any therapeutic dose. A typewriter in his surgery that had produced the forged will. Testimony from families who described Shipman discouraging post-mortems, urging cremation, dismissing their concerns. Fingerprint analysis of the forged will showed that Kathleen Grundy had never handled the will, and her signature was dismissed by a handwriting expert as a crude forgery. On January 31, 2000. The jury found Harold Shipman guilty on all 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. He received 15 life sentences with a recommendation that he never be released. The British government immediately launched the Shipman inquiry, chaired by Dame Janet Smith, to establish the full scope of his crimes and how they had gone undetected for so long. The inquiry concluded that Shipman had likely killed at least 215 patients, with the possibility of many more. He was linked to a total of 284 deaths. His youngest known victim was a 4-year-old girl, killed in the 10 minutes her mother was away from her cot, having a cup of tea. He never confessed. Not once. To any of it. He gave no list of victims. No explanations. No answers to the families who spent years trying to understand why their mothers, their grandmothers, their fathers had died. On January 13, 2004, one day before his 58th birthday, Harold Shipman was found hanged in his cell at Wakefield Prison. He had used bed sheets tied to the window bars. Some of the victims' families said they felt cheated, as his suicide meant they would never have the satisfaction of Shipman's confession, and answers as to why he committed his crimes. He had taken everything to his grave. Deliberately, many believe. One final act of control over the people he had spent his career manipulating. His death also had a financial consequence that few people know about. Had Shipman died in prison while serving his sentence, his wife Primrose would have received a full NHS pension. His suicide, coming before the pension terms were adjusted following his conviction, meant she received it anyway, until the rules were changed specifically because of his case. The legacy of Harold Shipman on British medicine is permanent and profound. Prescribing rules for controlled drugs were overhauled entirely. The system for death certification was reformed. A second independent doctor must now countersign cremation certificates. Monitoring of GP prescribing patterns was introduced. Inquiries into unexplained death rates among GP patients became standard practice. Caregiving serial murderers benefit from the blind spot afforded to those who care for society's most vulnerable. Harold Shipman exploited that blind spot for 30 years. He exploited the trust that patients place in their doctors, the deference that colleagues extend to each other, and the reluctance of a system to believe that the person at the center of community care could be the most dangerous person in the room. At least 215 people went to see their doctor and didn't come home. They weren't killed by a monster who looked like a monster. They were killed by a man who looked exactly like what he was supposed to be. A caring GP. A community pillar. Someone you could trust with your life. Harold Shipman killed for 30 years. We don't know exactly why. We don't know exactly how many. We don't know the name of his first victim with certainty or the thoughts that went through his mind as he watched the morphine take effect in room after room after room. What we do know is this: he was caught not by a system designed to catch him, but by a daughter who noticed her mother's signature didn't look right on a will she shouldn't have written. Angela Woodruff stopped Harold Shipman. The rest of the system had decades of chances. And didn't. Subscribe if this case stayed with you. And leave a comment. Do you think Shipman's suicide was one final act of control? Or do you think he simply couldn't face what was coming? I'll see you in the next one.